welcome to the Dissident Daughters podcast. I'm your host, Ada, and I'm here deconstructing my Mormon faith and making space for other women like me to do the same. If you don't know what a dissident daughter is, well, it's a woman who actively challenges an established political or religious system, doctrine, belief, policy, or institution. And that's why I'm here, to challenge the Mormon faith as an institution, its doctrine and policies. If you want to come along on this journey with me, stick around and we'll do some talking, laughing, maybe crying, venting, deconstructing. We'll learn some new things, hopefully, and most importantly, be supported through this difficult journey. I'm glad you're here. Hello, welcome to the Dissident Daughters podcast. This is Ada, and I've got my good friend Nancy here with me. Nancy's her code name. We are here today, and we are going to talk about our favorite dissident daughters, right?
Yes.
We have Nancy is a researcher at heart. She's a historian researcher.
I'm a nerd.
She's a nerd.
It's okay.
It's a better title. And so I thought it would be really fun to kind of research some of these women in Mormon history that we've heard about, that we know some stories about, and kind of highlight our favorite dissidents, because that's what this podcast is about, right?
That's right.
So I will go ahead and start, and then we'll just kind of take turns going through
yours.
We'll see. Who knows? Some of them are better than others, but okay. So I'm going to start with Mary Fielding Smith, okay? And she was a little bit of a hard one for me because at face value, I wouldn't necessarily have called her a dissident. But after researching more, I felt like she was as dissident as she could be at the time, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense.
While still having faith in the church, which I wish she would have come away from, but this was her situation. So she was born in 1801. She was raised in rural England. She was raised Methodist and super religious. Her family was super religious. In 1834, they immigrated to Toronto, Canada. And it was there that John Taylor and Parley Pratt came and tried to teach them the gospel. One of the kind of anecdotal stories is that Mary Fielding and her sister Martha, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget because I didn't write it down. Shoot. I think it's Martha, that they ran away from the missionaries and they hid because they didn't want to hear about this other people's church, which I thought was hilarious.
Running away from the home teacher.
Exactly, right? So they were kids, like teenage, maybe girls, at the time that the missionaries came and taught them. So anyways, their whole family joined the church. They moved to Kirtland in 1837. Her older brother left on a mission, and her sister immediately got married and went back to Canada. So now she was all alone. She became a governess and was doing that for somebody there in Kirtland. I'm not sure who. Then in October 1837, Hiram Smith, who was married to Jerusha Smith, Jerusha gave birth to their fifth child, and she died almost immediately after childbirth. Fifth child. So here Hiram is left with 5 children to raise. And Joseph almost immediately told Hiram to marry Mary. He's like, you need somebody to help you raise these kids. I think you should marry Mary. She's single. So then the next March, 1838, so they got married in December of 1837, right? March, just a few months later, they had to leave to go to Missouri. Hiram and Joseph were arrested and jailed at that time for 6 months. And Mary was pregnant when they were jailed. This was in Liberty Jail, when they went to Liberty Jail. So she gave birth to Joseph F. Smith, who was the future president of the church, right? Mm-hmm. But she was really sick after she had this baby. She has no husband there. She has 6 freaking kids, right? 5 that are not her own birth children, right? Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine. So she's there. Her husband's gone. Then they left Missouri and went to Illinois by 1839. So if you'll notice, all of these dates are very close together. Yeah. These are all boom, boom, boom. Year after year after year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot to happen to a person. Exactly. Mary had another child in June of 1844, which there was a little bit of a gap there, 5 years or so. But it was mostly because Hiram was gone all the time. So,
Yep.
yeah.
That's why.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
So let's see. So shortly after she had her second child in June of 1844, that's when Hiram and Joseph were killed. Okay. So she is now has 7 children, all very young, has barely, ever had a home, has had to move from town to town to town to town. And now her husband is dead. So they tell a story about like a day or two after they had passed, when they finally were able to bring the bodies, and they would bring them to the homes. And they talk about when she saw his body, she just wailed and just cried out his name. And her oldest child, Martha, which was named after her sister, reported that she almost never smiled again. Isn't that so sad? Yeah. So Mary and her children were some of the last saints to leave Nauvoo. In 1848, it wasn't until 1848 that Mary was assigned to go with Captain Lot. Okay, so they would have different captains over groups that would go. And so Captain Lot was assigned to take her, but he told her that she couldn't come with them because she would slow them down. He's like, you're a widow with all these kids. You're just going to be trouble for me. So I don't want you to come. So, and a lot of people have heard this story about her, but she basically said to him, I'm not going to be trouble. You aren't going to need to do anything for me. I'm going to do it all by myself, and I'm going to beat you to Zion. And so she just took that as a huge challenge, because he said, oh, now you're going to slow us down. Another story that most of us have heard about her is that one of her oxen suddenly collapsed, and she blessed it yeah. And it got up and went away. But there's conflicting stories about this, because in the story that I heard, it was that she blessed it. But then in another story I read, it was her son, Joseph F., who blessed the oxen. Oh, okay. And that's an interesting distinction, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because he had the power of the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gosh. So anyways, let's see. One of the days, where they had stayed over someplace, the captain essentially, ditched her. And when she got up, they were already gone. And so she raced. She got all packed up, and it was a race to Utah. And she was such a badass and wanted to prove to every man there that the widow didn't slow them down. She was just so determined. So she did. She beat them to Utah. She got there before them. Some of the stories are a little bit, just history's complicated. I'm sure there's more to that story than we know, but that's what I could find out. So after they settled in Utah, she was offered a lot near Temple Square, but she said, I want my independence. I'm going to go find my own space. And so she basically went south until she got to Mill Creek and found a little place right by the river, and she loved it and fell in love with it, and she made that her home.
Smart woman.
Yep. She asked for nothing. She asked for no help. She was like, I am determined. I am going to do this. But the sad thing about this is that, I feel like her determination and her working so hard on her own with no help, caused her to have some poor health. In 1852, which was that's only 4 years after getting to Utah, 3 or 4 years, she died of pneumonia. So she was only 51 years old. But okay, this is another really interesting.
That used to be old, but it isn't.
Yeah, that's true. That's not old anymore. That's so young. I guess then maybe that would have been considered old. So this is really interesting. I watched this. The church puts out these, I think they're called History of the Saints. And they're just kind of little short videos that highlight different members of the church. And in this video, they talk about this story, and they talk about how, she had pneumonia, and they say that before she died, she went to Heber C. Kimball's house and asked him for a blessing. And he gave her a blessing, and then she died shortly later. Well, once I dug a little bit further, what I realized was that Heber C. Kimball was her husband. Mm-hmm. And they never mentioned that. They acted like he was her home teacher, but he had taken her as one of his wives. I don't know what number, but pick a number. It was somewhere in the 60 wives that he had. But it was definitely a caretaker role. It was not an intimate husband-wife relationship, but she didn't bear any of his children or any of that. But it's just in these little small ways, they don't tell the whole story. And that's an important part of the story, I think. So when she was traveling, she married Heber C. back in Nauvoo. So when she was traveling to Utah, she didn't have to travel to Utah as a single widow. He was supposed to be her caretaker. Did he go with her? No, he did not. I'm not sure if he left before her or after her, but he was not with her. So he was not helping her. How was he a caretaker? So how can they claim the polygamy was to take care of the women?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So she did everything herself.
Yeah.
So I think she was a badass, even though she stayed faithful to the church. But I think what I loved about her story was that she didn't take the handouts. She didn't think of herself as weak or needing a man. She just
victim.
Yeah, she did not act like a victim.
On the victim mentality.
Yep. She pulled herself up by the bootstraps and just did what she had to do. And she took care of all of those kids that were not hers. And, until she died, of course. And then I don't know what happened to him. Who knows if Heber C. Kimball took care of him? Because, he clearly didn't take care of anything else.
He didn't.
Gosh. Yeah, he is well known as being like the worst husband in Mormon history.
Dad.
Yeah, the neglectful dad. I didn't know that anybody could compete with Brigham Young for being the worst, but I'm pretty sure Heber C. Kimball was the worst.
Yeah, I agree.
So okay, now you go on your first lady.
I'm going to go a modern times one first. So will that throw everybody off?
No, not at all.
Okay,
we're not going in order.
I chose Margaret Toscano.
Yes.
And Toscano. I don't want to murder that name. No. Anyway. And she was kind of the September 6 3/4. She could have easily have been part of the September. There could have been September 7. Yeah. But as events turn out, she didn't. So most of this is taken from a PBS interview on American Experience.
Okay.
And it was in January of 2006, if you want to look it up. So she was born in Arizona. And it says that her family was from Mormon pioneers. So they were an old family, but they kind of had more lenient views on the church as she was growing up. She says they had really good discussions in their home and that kind of stuff. So you were okay to have questions about the gospel and that kind of thing. It says that the quote is, "She was very believing but open, loving was the sort of background that I came from. I went as a freshman to BYU and more or less stayed around in Utah," is what she did until she married Paul Toscano. I'm going to murder that the whole time. So anyway, and then she's very, very smart, extremely smart, very well spoken. And she started doing research and come up with some research that Joseph Smith actually did ordain women. Ooh. And that he had given women the priesthood, and it was through the temple endowment. And so
wait, was she the first one to
probably
openly go back and say, okay, he did
I don't know. You'd have to do some research, but she it says here, I looked at the different statements of Joseph Smith. I discovered that he believed, and he said this very clearly, that he gave women the priesthood through the Mormon temple ceremony. I uncovered a lot of historical statements about this, both from him and his close followers who had taught this also. I wrote a lot about this issue and also using other Mormon theological ideas, transcribed and sent it to church headquarters.
I love her.
She's so brave.
Her.
I just love that about her.
Yeah.
And it says where they had been, then it was given to her stake president.
Oh, of course it was.
Yeah.
Of course it was.
As they wouldn't want to handle it.
Right.
So anyway, because
do you know
this,
what year that was that would have happened, or just a range?
So she was threatened with excommunication in 1993. So it would have been around there.
Around that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so because of that, she was actually threatened with it in around 1993. She received a letter from her stake president that told her that she was not allowed to, and this is quote, speak, discuss, publish, write about anything to do with church history or church doctrine, or they would hold a church court on me.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I know, right?
Okay.
It says the things that they had asked me not to speak about were women in the priesthood and the Mormon idea or the Mormon concept of Heavenly Mother. And then there are other things that she was told not to speak on.
Oh, okay.
So this woman is very sharp. She's a college professor.
Yeah.
And they're telling her not to write or speak or really? It just is so...
And so specifically about these are the topics you're not allowed to discuss.
It's like, ooh, that just rubs me the wrong way.
Definitely.
Anyway. And I realized when I read her whole story, she's a very refined woman. And I'm not.
Because she didn't just say, fuck you.
Exactly. Yep. So, anyway, I did realize that. So,
That's funny.
Anyway, it said after, so things progressed, and the September 6th were excommunicated. Let's see, that would have been 93.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So things progressed, and her husband was excommunicated as one of them. It was not because of what she had written. Okay. He supported her, but he was not
He did his own thing
he
that
did
caused
his own
his
thing that
excommunication.
caused his excommunication.
Now, he was a professor at BYU as well?
Yes.
Okay, because that's what all the September 6 were, right? They were all professors at BYU, I thought.
Were they all? I'm not sure if they were all BYU professors.
Oh, okay.
They were all intellectuals, for sure.
Okay.
Well, we'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
Because I can't.
That was
I
my
don't know for
thinking,
sure if
but
they
I could
were
totally
all
be wrong.
at BYU.
Okay.
So anyway, he was excommunicated as one of the September 6th, and they just kind of left her alone. But she continued to write.
Almost like it's like, this is what happens when you speak out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, almost like, I don't know, threatening to her.
I'm thinking they thought they cut the head off the snake.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But what they didn't realize is they were dealing with was that two-headed snake?
A two-headed snake?
Or the three-headed one? Yeah. So,
interesting.
Anyway, a basilisk, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's right.
I don't know. So, that one did just have one head. Anyway, let's get...
I don't know.
So, anyway, she continued to write and lecture. So then in the year 2000, she was actually threatened with the excommunication again. And they did bring it to a court. And it says, it drives me crazy. It says, they brought the charges against me, this apostasy, saying that I had been in opposition to the church, and then proceeded to give their case. So this is, they called her in, sit her down in their room with all, I think it was held in a gym, if I remember right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm trying to go by what I heard, not what, anyway, in a gym. And she is like with 18 men, I think, and sitting there. You know how uncomfortable that would be.
You're the only woman. And all these men in authority over you.
Yes. And you're sitting there, and it says, and this was the reason why it felt very much like a kangaroo court to me, was that I really was never given a chance to defend myself. Oof. So at one point, she stands up and tries to defend herself and her research. And she gives the actual documentation of where Joseph Smith had said these things. And she was, the stake president stands up. And she gave an example of how the blacks in the priesthood. In the middle of her sentence, the stake president interrupted her and said, "We will not allow you to lecture us. We will not allow you to use this kind of reasoning again. You're only allowed to speak as we give you permission. And of course," she says, "and of course I just stopped mid-sentence. I couldn't go on." That right there tells me she's refined, because I am not. Yeah. I would have given the middle finger, said, "F you, buddy," and walked out. I seriously would have. I know I would have, because I've done that to employers before. So, anyway, so that just tells me that she is a very refined, educated woman. And anyway, she says, "I couldn't go on," but you can imagine that this was, you don't really feel like you have much of a defense.
Yeah.
So then, okay, this court goes on. They dismiss her. And she steps out of the room for like 20 minutes. And then they have her come back in. She says, "It occurred to me as I'm sitting there that if this had been the Middle Ages, if these men had not only this ecclesiastical power, but if they had had the power of the state, where they could give a physical punishment to me, I realized in this moment that they would have burned me at the stake, and they would have done it smiling. thinking that they were saving my soul. This is why at the end they can shake my hand and say, "Oh, you were such a lovely person." So after she comes back in and they tell her, they start this of telling her how impressed they are with her. How they find her so educated and well spoken, and that they were really impressed with her. And then they tell her, "And we have excommunicated you." And then they all stand up and shake her hands.
This is such a barbaric.
It is barbaric.
Like, passive aggressive kind of. Because they act really kind and smile.
And so she was excommunicated. It says, so she continues to speak out even today. And it says, "I sometimes like to tell people that Mormonism is an ethnicity as well as a religion. That's why I can say I'm Mormon, but I'm not LDS. You're part of a culture, and it's very deep." So she has found a way, to say, well, they did this to me. Yeah. And this is, and I can kind of relate to that. Yeah. But I don't think I would have taken it as well as her. I know I wouldn't have, because I was too hot-headed.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been so nice about it.
Yeah, so anyway.
Interesting.
She's amazing to me.
They're like, "We really love you. We think you're great. Here, we're shaking your hand and we're kicking you out."
Yes, exactly. It's so bizarre. It's just... Yeah,
because she had strong feelings about women in the priesthood. And Heavenly Mother.
Heavenly Mother is one of the things that she tried to...
And blacks in the priesthood, or the racism in the church,
she used that to justify, to bring out, they changed their mind about the blacks. Yes. Why couldn't they? I mean, because there was proof that Joseph Smith embraced that at one time.
Was she like the original Kate Kelly?
Kind of.
Was she kind of fighting for women to have the priesthood?
I think she was a bit of like a precursor to Kate Kelly.
Yeah, interesting.
And she's an amazing lady. I encourage everybody to listen to the interview, because and it was on American Experience, January 2006. Oh my gosh.
2006.
2006. How's that?
I know. It gets so confusing now.
Anyway, so
that is so interesting.
Because you will see the refinement, when you listen to her speak. And
See, and I didn't realize that the priesthood thing was part of her. I always think of her in the category of fighting for Heavenly Mother specifically. And I know the September 6th, that was a big part of the September 6th was all the talk about Heavenly Mother. So I love that.
Well, and she was for women's rights, and
always in general
of women's rights.
Yeah, because those things are tied to each other: the Heavenly Mother concept and the women in the priesthood. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Anyway, she just really impressed me, and she makes the list. So.
I love it. Okay, she's an awesome dissident daughter.
Yep.
All right, our next one is Sarah Pratt. Okay, she was born Sarah Miranda Bates in 1817 in New York. At the age of 19, she met the missionaries and was baptized a member. And one of the missionaries was Orson Pratt. So they fell in love and married as soon as his mission was over. So she was one of those girls. 3 days. Okay. They had a 3-day honeymoon after their wedding. And then Orson was sent on another freaking mission.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me.
Right. So in about a 4-year period, they moved from Kirtland to Far West and then to Nauvoo. She gave birth to a couple kids. Her second child was a daughter named Lydia, and she gave birth to her in Missouri, but was quickly made to leave Missouri and move to Nauvoo. And when they got to Nauvoo, Lydia died of an infection. So she was about 9 months old at the time. So her second baby had died, of an infection at 9 months old. And 11 days later, Orson got called on another freaking mission. 11 days after her baby had died.
Who does that?
Right? Yeah. To Europe.
That right there tells me they took no consideration for the women's feelings.
No. Nope.
It was like, she's probably in the worst turmoil.
Right.
But what do we care?
Yeah, what do we care? We're going to go spread the gospel. We need more recruits. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So they sent him to Europe.
We need more women to marry.
Yeah, bring some more women over. We're running out.
And don't take all the pretty ones on the ship.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's totally valid. That is absolutely true. So shortly after, she began sewing to try to support her family. So she began sewing for the Smith family specifically, but also others. But then came the polygamy scandal, is what it's called, in 1842. So there's a lot that goes into this polygamy scandal, as we're calling it. And so hopefully I can keep track of all the details and make it make sense to you. But essentially, John C. Bennett accused basically accused Joseph Smith of practicing polygamy. Right. And Joseph Smith said, oh no, then he accused him. He basically accused him back. He accused John C. Bennett of seducing several women, including Sarah Pratt. And so Sarah Pratt was on this list of women that supposedly John C. Bennett and Joseph Smith, like both of them were claiming the other person had done it, right?
Wait till we get to Nancy.
Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Nancy, too. Yeah. And so at that time, John C. Bennett was excommunicated. But all along, he claimed that Joseph Smith was the one that was propositioning, Sarah to marry him while her husband was away in Europe still, right? This is still going on. So Joseph Smith, to counteract those allegations, he compiled a pamphlet of affidavits, certificates, and letters, which quote unquote proved his innocence and Bennett's guilt concerning sexual misconduct. But what we'll find later is that a lot of that was lies, because this included affidavits produced by a sheriff and also Sarah's landlords. Their last name is Goddard, Stephen and Zuriah Goddard. Mm-hmm. They were her landlords. And they will come into the story a little bit later. So Sarah, at this time, stayed totally silent about the issue. She did not say a word. And so did Orson. Orson stayed silent on the issue. And so their silence was seen as traitorous, and they excommunicated Orson when he got back from his mission, because he did not stick up for Joseph and say Joseph didn't do these things. So, and he was one of the apostles, right? Mm-hmm. He was one of the top apostles in the church, excommunicated in August 1842 because he did not speak out and support Joseph Smith. According to an article by Van Wagner, I don't know what that is, but Sarah M. Pratt, it's titled Sarah M. Pratt, The Shaping of an Apostate. At this time, though, initially, Sarah was not excommunicated. But this is so weird and convoluted, because what they ended up doing is Orson wanted to be back in the church, and so they rebaptized both Orson and Sarah, which I'm not sure why Sarah needed to be rebaptized, because she wasn't excommunicated. But here's the crazy part. As soon as she was rebaptized, the apostles immediately excommunicated her for adultery with John C. Bennett, because they claimed that she committed adultery back before. It doesn't make any sense. I know. It doesn't make any logical sense. But so in February of 1843, Joseph Smith allowed both Orson and Sarah to be rebaptized again. And Orson was restored to his former position as an apostle. So after the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, Sarah accompanied Orson Pratt to Utah. And it would only be later that she would openly take a stand on this matter that happened back in Nauvoo between John C. Bennett and Joseph Smith, right? Up until that time, she was totally silent. But she had been seduced, and she confirmed it, and confirmed by whom, okay? So fast forward several years. In 1886, she was finally willing to go on record regarding these allegations. This author, Wilhelm Ritter von Wymetal, published the anti-Mormon volume called Mormon Portraits. And in her 1886 interview with Sarah Pratt alleged that Joseph Smith engaged Bennett, a medical doctor, to perform abortions on Smith's plural wives who were otherwise unmarried. Bennett's biographer, Andrew Smith, agrees that it was true and that Bennett performed abortions. At the time of the 1842 controversy, the Goddards, remember, they were the landlords of Sarah Pratt. Zuriah Goddard had claimed that Bennett told Sarah Pratt that he could cause abortion with perfect safety. This is a quote. He could cause abortion with perfect safety to the mother at any stage of pregnancy, and that he had frequently destroyed and removed infants before their time to prevent exposure of the parties, and that he had instruments for that purpose. Despite these allegations of abortions originating with Dr. Bennett and Sarah Pratt, Contemporary testimony of seduced women in 1842 assert that they were offered medicine to prevent pregnancy, not abortions to destroy evidence of pregnancy. But Sarah recounted an incident, and this is a quote. Bennett was en route to do a little job for Joseph because one of his women was in trouble. So in saying this, she says, he took out a pretty long instrument of a kind I had never seen before. It seemed to be of steel and was crooked at one end. I heard afterwards that the operation had been performed, that the woman was very sick, and that Joseph was very much afraid that she might die, but she recovered.
Oh, this is something I'd like to do more research on.
Yes. Pratt also told Metal, who was the journalist doing this article, how she had refuted Smith's son. So after the fact, after Joseph Smith Jr. had died and everything, Joseph Smith III really believed that his dad never practiced polygamy, right? And so he came at her because she was coming out about this. And let's see. I saw that he was not inclined to believe, this is her quote, I saw that he was not inclined to believe the truth about his father. So I said to him, you pretend to have revelations from the Lord. Why don't you ask the Lord to tell you what kind of a man your father really was? And he answered, if my father had so many connections with women, where is the progeny? And I said to him, your father had mostly intercourse with married women. And as to the single ones, Dr. Bennett was always on hand when anything happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So at this time, she tells this story about Joseph Smith saying that to her. And then Joseph Smith III publishes a totally different story about his conversation with Sarah Pratt. And that's really interesting too. I'll send you this information. So by 1886, Mrs. Goddard was dead and couldn't refute anything that Pratt might say about her former landlords. Joseph and Hiram were also dead and unable to refute Pratt. But at this time, so, Pratt is the only one saying this, but she told Metal that when those testimonials were published from Joseph Smith, where he got all these sworn affidavits that he had not done what they said he did, she went straight to the Goddard's home, and she said that when she did, Stephen, the husband, ran out the back door. But she confronted Zariah, who sobbed and cried, and she said, it's not my fault. Hiram Smith came to our house with the affidavits all written out and forced us to sign them. Joseph and the church must be saved, he said. That was his quote. We saw that resistance was useless and they would have ruined us, so we signed the papers. She told that to Sarah Pratt at the time. Her accounts portray her as being a virtuous innocent if knowledgeable about Bennett's alleged abortions on Smith's behalf. The elderly Pratt would claim, so this is much later when she was older, I know that the principal statements in John C. Bennett's book on Mormonism are true. In 1868, so now we're kind of bouncing around timelines, but earlier, Orson had started practicing polygamy, and Sarah was not okay with it. She was not happy about it. But it wasn't until he married his 10th wife, who was a woman brought over from England, a 16-freaking-year-old, and Orson was 57.
Oh, that is so gross.
Yes.
So gross.
Sarah was pissed, and she was furious that he would marry a woman that was younger than his own daughter, first of all.
Yeah, that might be a little bit of a gripe.
Yeah, which our current prophet is married to someone younger than his own daughter, too. Let's just make that note, okay?
You're right. Okay.
Sarah Pratt functionally at that time ended her marriage to Orson Pratt. Now, this was not done legally. She didn't end, but functionally, she said, I am no longer your wife. I want nothing to do with you. So she said he had an obsession with marrying younger women. She condemned polygamy until her death. She said, this is her quote, polygamy completely demoralizes good men and makes bad men correspondingly worse. As for the women...
Oh, that's a good quote.
Yeah, right? And she says, as for the women, well, God help them. First wives it renders desperate or else heartbroken, mean-spirited creatures. Sarah was then excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on October 4th, 1874, because she would not be quiet about all of this stuff. She described herself, she said, I am the wife of Orson Pratt. I was formerly a member of the Mormon Church. I have not been a believer in the Mormon doctrines for 30 years and am now considered an apostate.
Good for her.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there's one quote about him marrying this young girl, and he says, Here's my husband, gray-headed, taking to his bed young girls in mockery of marriage. Of course, there could be no joy for him in such an intercourse except for the indulgence of his fanaticism and of something else, perhaps, which I am hesitant to mention.
If she thinks there's no joy for him, think about the girl.
Yeah. Oh, my God, right? Oh, the poor
saggy balls.
girl.
No, thanks.
Oh, no. Okay, so then she was a strong proponent for the Anti-Polygamy Society, which came about in Utah in about 1878. She called herself a Mormon apostate. And all of her surviving children, all the children who grew to adulthood, they all rejected the church as well. She claimed that she had resolved to rear her children, and this is her quote, "Rear my children so that they should never espouse the Mormon faith while concealing from my neighbors and the church authority that I was thus rearing them." So she was in this Mormon bubble, right?
Right.
And she felt like she had to keep appearances of like living by the gospel, but she did not teach them.
And at the time, you had to worry about like the Danites.
Exactly.
There was a physical
harm.
Yep.
There was a lot of harm. Yeah. And so she ended up bearing 12 children, all Orsons. They were all Orson's kids, but several of her children were excommunicated. Orson Pratt Jr. refused to serve a mission when Brigham Young asked him to. He also was made a high counselor. And this is a quote from him. He says, "I was made a high counselor, although I was then an unbeliever, as I am now in regard to my faith. I resolved I would not accept anything that my conscience would not receive. I have come to the conclusion that Joseph Smith was not especially sent by the Lord to establish this work, and I cannot help it, for I could not believe otherwise, even if I knew I was to suffer for it." Also, her son Arthur Pratt, reported in 1882. This is his quote, "I am the son of my father's first wife, and I had a mother who taught me the evils of the system." He was excommunicated in October 1874. So I loved that. I thought she was a badass because she spoke out against polygamy. She was not taking any crap from anyone. She was propositioned by Joseph Smith, but he denied it, and he got all these people to get on his side and to sign affidavits that she was lying, or that John Bennett was lying, when in fact it was Joseph Smith the whole time. So
that is so cool that there's people that knew clear back then, you know?
Yeah, right?
They didn't have the research we have, but they knew in their hearts that it was wrong. Her son's testimony.
Yeah, the evils of the system.
Yeah, I like that.
So, I mean, they never talk about Sarah Pratt.
No. It's the first I've ever heard of her.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, isn't that interesting? So
that's awesome.
Yep, loved that one.
Well, that's good. Oh, okay. Well, now I kind of want to do Nancy because hers is kind of like this.
Okay. Around the same time frame, right?
This is my idol, Nancy.
That's why you go by Nancy here.
I seriously had her as my screensaver for months. Anyway,
love her.
Yeah. So, the reason I chose her, she has badass courage. So, she was born 8th of December, 1822 in Pittsburgh. She is the daughter of prominent church leader Sidney Rigdon. So kind of the second in command until they had their falling out.
He was from the very beginning.
Yep. So on 9th of April, 1842, she was approached by Joseph Smith to become a polygamous wife. And the way he did it just makes me sick. So he had her, I'll actually read it. It says, this comes from George W. Robinson, who was her brother-in-law. He was married to her sister. And on 22nd of July, 1842, Smith sent for Rigdon to come to the house of Mrs. Orson Hyde, and she was living above the printing press. Or below the printing press. They call it the under rooms. And so I've not figured that out yet, but she lived in the under rooms of the printing office. According to Robinson, Nancy inquired of the messenger what was wanting, and the only reply was that Smith wanted to see her. Robinson claimed that Smith took her into a room and locked the door. Okay, right there, I would have been looking for a stove poker or something. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Because you are not refined.
I'm not refined. And then stated to her that he had an affection for her for several years. She actually defended him in some kind of a court thing when she was just young.
Yeah, because she was raised to believe he was the mouthpiece for God.
Yeah.
And she's this young girl.
Yes.
He is the prophet.
So growing up thinking that he is this godlike person, you know what I mean? And has that much authority over, for her to stand up to him, she gets a prize there. So anyway, she had wished that she should be his, that the Lord was well pleased with this matter, for he had got a revelation on the subject.
Oh God, of course he did. God told me that you're supposed to be my plural wife. Yeah. Of course he did.
Yes. I call the doctrine of covenants the doctrine of convenience.
You know what I mean? Because it really is. Right.
Yeah.
It is. Yep.
So God had given him all the blessings of Jacob, etc., and that there were no sin whatsoever. Robinson reported that Nancy repulsed him and was about to raise the neighbors if he did not unlock the door and let her out.
Woo!
So at that point, he sent this, what's her name? Miranda Hyde back in to talk to Nancy, because he used these older women to try and encourage the younger women. She was a
recruiter wife.
Yeah, she was a recruiter wife.
Yep, Nancy Miranda Hyde.
And she got paid for it because she got this house. Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
And somebody to sleep with when her husband was on his mission. But anyway, so he sent her back in to try and talk her into it. And then he said he'd send her a letter. And a couple of days later, he sent her this letter, which is now is known as the happiness letter. And if you want to hear this letter, what's his name? Jonathan Streeter.
Yes.
Does a version of this letter that is amazing. So look that up. Because,
so good. Look on YouTube, right?
Yeah. Yep. And it is from Thoughts on Things and Stuff. Is that what it's called?
But anyway, if you just do a search for Jonathan Streeter happiness letter, you will find it.
And it just gives you chills. You can almost see him sitting there writing it. So anyway, but in this letter, I'll read part of it. It says, happiness is the object and design of our existence. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be and often is right under another. The letter went on to teach that whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is. Although we may not see the reason thereof till long after the events transpire, our Heavenly Father is more liberal in his views and boundless in his mercies and blessings than we are ready to believe or receive. And also in the letter, he talks about, but he can also be, I'm paraphrasing here, but he can also be crueler. I mean, he can be more than we give him credit for if we do not obey.
We do not listen.
So
it's a promise and a threat.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And so anyway, at this point, Nancy, she had not revealed this confrontation with Joseph to her family, but when she received this letter, she took it to her dad.
She was like, enough already.
She let him read it. And he demanded an audience with Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith comes over to the house. Nancy is in another room, but she can hear what's going on. And Joseph denies everything and says he's such a sleaze. Anyway, he denies it. She came into the room and said, Joseph, you are telling that which is not true. Ooh. You did make such a proposition to me, and you know it. And her sister, who was there, said to Nancy, are you not afraid to call the Lord's anointed a cursed liar? And she says, no, she replied, I am not, for he does lie, and he knows it. I love her. I just love her for that. So anyway, so after this, Joseph's he can't back down. And
does he admit?
He admits it, but then he said it was a test of her virtue.
Oh my God.
You know how
of course
he does those Abrahamic tests? Yeah, he says it was a test of her virtue.
That's convenient.
But Rigdon never really did, her dad never did really buy that.
That was the next question I was going to say is, did he believe her? Did he stick with her story?
He did. I think he did believe her, but then there was parts or a time when, after this, where Joseph really did slander her, or he indirectly slandered her, and that she was known as the town whore and that kind of thing. And of course Rigdon was still trying to get back in favor with Joseph. So at that, I'm like, okay, Rigdon, stand up for your daughter. You know what I mean? He's doing this to her. Yeah. But whatever, And so, and it must not have damaged her too bad because like 4 years later she was married. So, and she wasn't too old. She was at the age of 24. She married Robert Ellis and went on to live.
And she stayed in the church. Oh, she did not
stay
in the church.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
But she wasn't excommunicated necessarily.
No.
But she was punished by being gossiped about. Like Joseph started rumors about her saying that she's, a whore and getting around because that discounts her story so that anybody that hears her story says, "Oh yeah, sure, you're a liar. You're not a virtuous woman, so we're going to believe the prophet over you."
Right. And I don't know whether she actually left the church, but she moved. I think she went to Pittsburgh or something. So she left the Saints. She did not. And so I don't imagine I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So,
right?
Yeah.
I love that she said that.
Yeah, me too.
She storms into the room and says, "You are lying.
You are lying." I know. And that takes courage because
some guts.
He had so much authority over her. I mean, it's like, her dad's position in the church, everything was. Yeah. And plus they believed he was, I don't know why, but they believed he was a prophet. And so anyway.
And the other thing I wanted to point out about that is the happiness letter became well known, but taken out of context, right? So I remember, you can look it up. You Google happiness letter and you'll find all kinds of quotes from General Conference, from recent prophets. I think as recent as Thomas S. Monson, I think, quoted the beginning of the happiness letter where it talks about happiness is the object of our existence. They use that very first quote, but they don't tell you where that came from.
They don't.
Or what the context is.
Maybe they don't even know. Because I think
the leaders know.
General authorities will use past general authorities talks.
That's true.
Take pieces of them. And so I wonder if it's just been passed down like that. But anyway.
I remember the happiness letter being talked about in Relief Society and not having. Yes, I remember it being brought up and being quoted, but not for what it actually was.
Right.
There was no mention of all the really manipulative, creepy parts of that letter.
Yeah.
And I heard, I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can confirm this or not, or because I don't know whether it's true, but I heard that often his approach to women when trying to proposition them to be a plural wife, his first question to them would be, do you believe that I'm a prophet?
Yes.
Okay, so you've heard the same thing.
Yes. And if you look at other so-called religious men who have coerced women, they use the same approach. Tactics. The same tactics all the way around, getting the women alone, getting them away from their families, that kind of thing is just, he is.
Getting in good with their family members, though, whether it's a brother or a dad or something, to try and make so that they're on his side, so that they trust him too.
Yep.
So that when she says, "Oh, this happened," they're like, "Oh, but not Joseph. He would never do that.
He would never do that."
So manipulative.
It is, yeah. And so when that's one of the reasons that I can't go to church anymore is because when they glorify him, I just want to throw up. I'm like, you are glorifying a sexual predator. Can we stop? Yeah. There's a quote by one of them. Maybe it was Monson. Give Brother
Joseph a break.
I just want to say, give me a break.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, it's like you give a break.
He doesn't deserve
to
a break.
Who plows his field wrong or is maybe a little harsh with his wife and children, but not sexual predators.
Yeah.
No.
Who claim they speak for God.
Yes, who claim they speak for God.
Yeah.
Nope.
I've received a revelation that you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just so bad.
But
I love her.
She was just spunky, and I loved what she did.
Yeah, definitely a good dissident daughter, right?
Yep. Yes.
She's amazing. That's awesome.
Okay. Nancy.
So the next one, her name is Martha Maria Hughes Cannon. I'm sure that's not her original name. I think her name was Martha Maria Hughes. Her married name was Cannon. So we'll get there. She was born in 1857 in Wales. And then they took the trek west. Her younger sister died and was buried in an unmarked grave. She was 21 months old. So this was traumatic. Like, I just don't think that we stop and really consider how traumatic it is to lose family members on the trek west and have, number one, no time to mourn their loss. You just have to keep moving. You bury them in a shallow, unmarked grave and you keep going.
Yeah, one of my great grandpas was buried along the Snake River.
Oh,
yeah. Sad.
That has to be so traumatic. So they arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in 1861. 3 days after arriving in the Salt Lake Valley, her father died. So at the age of 14, she was maybe like 12 when they arrived in Salt Lake and her father died. At the age of 14, she started teaching school. So, yeah, right? So then, and she was a very like driven, very smart woman. She wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. So first she taught school for a year. Then she decided she wanted to learn typesetting. She got a job for the Deseret News and then the Women's Exponent. It was there that she met Emmeline Wells and Eliza R. Snow, and they were kind of mentors to her because they were, badass women in their own rights, right? They were strong, independent women as well, even though they were married to Brigham Young, who was an asshole. But she had, so they kind of took her under their wing. She had told them that she wanted to become a doctor. They fully encouraged her. At the age of 16, she enrolled at the University of Deseret, which is now the University of Utah, as a pre-med major. In 1878, she graduated and was one of 4 women set apart for medical studies and practice by the LDS Church and went to medical school in Michigan.
Okay, wait a minute. My mind's being blown.
I know. You're like, wait, how did this happen?
No, I did not know that the University of Utah was church run.
Oh, yeah, that was the original. That was Brigham Young's original church. School, sorry. Brigham Young.
How did I not know that?
Brigham Young started the University of Utah, but it was University of Deseret. So BYU isn't even Brigham Young's school. No, you did not know that.
Yeah. I thought they were always the...
Nope. No, the University of Utah was the first college in Utah, and it was started by Brigham Young. It's called University of Deseret.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been educated.
Yeah. So she went there as a pre-med major, graduated, and then she was set apart for medical studies and practice by the LDS Church. So I don't know, because the LDS Church was like so much, not just the church, it was like the whole political system too. It was like they were the government too.
Right.
And they allowed her to go to Michigan to medical school.
Allowed her.
At the age of 23, she graduated from med school in Michigan. Can you believe this woman? She's amazing. So she continued schooling even after graduating as a doctor. She got her PhD, but she kept going to school. And by the time...
No, is it a PhD or MD?
Sorry, MD.
Oh,
MD.
Okay.
You're right.
Okay, yeah.
You're right. No, MD.
I thought, okay.
You're right.
So.
But she continued going to schooling. And by the age of 25, she had 4 bachelor degrees.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's awesome. So she had 4 bachelor's degrees. She decided to move back to Utah, and she opened a private medical practice. But shortly after, she was asked to become the resident physician for Deseret Hospital, which is LDS Hospital now. Okay. So that was the first hospital. So at this time, Angus Munn Cannon was the superintendent of the hospital. And he was a polygamist, of course. And
I love that.
So that year, the Edmunds Act, okay, remember that. Edmunds Act was passed by Congress, making polygamy a felony. And anyone who practiced polygamy would be fined $500 and spend 5 years in prison. This was in 1882, okay, remember that too. These are important details. But in 1884, she married this guy, Cannon, who was the superintendent of the hospital. She was his 4th wife. So they had to keep it a complete secret. Even her mom didn't know that she married him, okay? Even her own mother could not attend a ceremony or anything, okay? But rumors started flying that Angus was a polygamist, and he was taken to court and he was sentenced to jail. So at this time, she finds out she's pregnant, and she goes into hiding because Angus, her husband, went to jail.
And babies are proof.
Exactly. And a lot of pregnant women had to go into hiding.
That is so sad.
So she gave birth while he was in jail. And then eventually, like, she was trying to evade warrants and the government. She exiled herself to Europe. And while she was in Europe, Angus married 2 more women. She was gone with her young daughter in Europe. Him marrying these other women it was not okay with her. I mean, she was the 4th wife already. Right. So it's not like but it just upset her. She was very jealous. She really, really struggled.
Well, and they usually were struggling financially too.
Oh, yeah.
And you add more families.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Yeah. So she really struggled. But while she was in Europe, then the Edmunds-Tucker Act came about. And that was different. It made women in the Utah territory unable to vote after, like, they had already had the right to vote since 1870. Yes. And then it was suddenly taken away.
Yes.
So women in Utah started to rally, and Martha became the leader of the Utah Women's Suffrage Association. So she came back to Utah. She felt so strongly about this. She started traveling to suffrage conferences with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton. She gave speeches at the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. She was one of the featured speakers there of the Women's Congress. In her fight for women's suffrage, she felt that education, freedom, and purpose were vitally important for mothers. This is her quote. "Somehow I know that women who stay home all the time have the most unpleasant homes there are. You give me a woman who thinks about something besides cook stoves and wash tubs and baby flannels, and I'll show you 9 times out of 10 a successful mother."
Yeah. Yep. I get that.
Isn't that amazing? So in 1896, voting rights were restored to women. So at that time, she ran as a Democrat for state senator against her Republican husband.
I love that. You told me that over the phone, and I'm like, yes. I wonder how the
not only
dinner conversation was with
I
that.
know, right? Not only did she run against him, but she won.
That is awesome.
She beat him. So local newspapers really fed into this story. It was a big
ERA
deal.
Thing was just starting.
Yeah, they loved to play
suffrages.
Exactly, and they loved to play on the fact that this leading Mormon polygamist was defeated by his 4th wife.
That's awesome.
The Salt Lake Tribune, proponent of the Republican view at that time, editorialized that Angus Muncannon was deserving of readers' votes. So they were trying to get people to vote for him. But the Salt Lake Herald, it was a Democratic newspaper, apparently, said Miss Maddie Hughes Cannon, his wife, is the better man of the 2.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they said, send Mrs. Cannon to the state senate and let Mr. Cannon, as a Republican, remain at home to manage home industry.
Let him deal with baby flannels.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
she beat him in the election in November. She became the first woman elected as a state senator in the United States with 10,288 votes, while her husband only received just over 8,000 votes. So the couple reported that no relationship issues were produced from the election, but who knows? Yeah. Well, and we picture it as, conversations over dinner, but we have to remember he had 6 other wives besides her.
She probably never
saw him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or any money.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So
let's see. The next part. So while she was in office, she introduced several bills, all of them having to do with women and girls' education and healthcare. This was her push, right? She also helped people who in the deaf, dumb, and blind community. I don't know if that's politically correct anymore, but that's what they called it at the time.
Right. Uh-huh.
In political conventions, her wit, rapid thinking, and knowledge made her capable of holding her own and of representing her sex most favorably. She gave birth to her 3rd child at the end of her 1st term, so she did not run again. So she just had a 3rd child. So she must have seen him sometimes.
Must have. Or somebody.
Yeah, exactly. When she was done with her political run, she served as a member of the Utah Board of Health and the State School Board for the Deaf and Blind. Her husband died in 1915. And then at that time, she moved to Los Angeles to be near her son. Her adult son had moved to Los Angeles. She died in 1932 and was brought back to Salt Lake to be buried next to Angus. In 1986, the new Utah Department of Health building was dedicated and named the Martha Hughes Cannon Health Building in Salt Lake City.
That's awesome.
And a bronze statue of her was moved to the foyer of the Utah State Senate building.
But she never ran for office again.
Nope. No, she just had that short one term.
That's awesome.
In office. But man, she was a badass. In my opinion, anybody who dares run against her husband for Senate and wins,
I love it. Awesome.
Is amazing.
That's cool.
If you enjoy this content and it's been helpful for you, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. Leave us a review if you love us. And finally, if you feel so inclined, I would really appreciate financial support in this work. You can go to dissidentdaughters.org and donate, or you can go to mormondiscussionpodcast.org and choose Dissident Daughters in the drop-down menu when you go to set up your donation. You can do a one-time donation, or better yet, set up a monthly donation of even $5. If you've left the church recently, you've probably experienced a 10% income increase. And here's a place where you can donate and know that you are supporting a fellow dissident daughter who wants to stick around and keep providing a supportive space for deconstructing our faith together. Thanks for all your support.